This happened back in 2021 when I was 16 and used to smoke. One day I decided to go to the gas station and buy some cigars. On my way there, I felt like calling my friend, but he didn't answer. For privacy reasons, we'll call my friend Michael. I got to the gas station, but I ended up failing trying to buy some cigars. I just decided to get some drinks and snacks, and I started walking back home. Just to keep in mind, my neighborhood is across the street from an apartment complex, and the complex is next to a church. I always left through my neighborhood's side entrance, and I took a shortcut through the apartments to get to the gas station a little bit faster. Well, on my way back, as soon as I was about to walk back into my neighborhood, a white van sped past me and then swerved into the church parking lot. The van parked at the front of the lot, then facing me. Now, around this time in Louisiana, there were a lot of kidnappings happening with vans being involved, which made alarms instantly go off in my head when the van did this. I decided to turn around and walk back into the apartments. I wasn't too worried since there were people outside and it was broad daylight, but I was still on guard. After about 2 minutes of walking and people were starting to look at me, I decided it was time for me to leave. I walked back to my neighborhood's side entrance, being vigilant of the van still parked in the church's lot. As soon as I entered my neighborhood, the van sped out of the parking lot, driving right towards me. Now looking back, I know this was stupid of me, but I didn't immediately run. I told myself if I even feel the van is about to slow down, I'm dropping my bags and running. The van sped past me though, right down the road. I felt relieved while at the same time my friend Michael called me back, who I immediately started explaining the situation to. Now, I'm someone who always thinks about a lot of different outcomes, and I'm really glad I was ready for what was about to happen next. I decided to start speed walking home, and as I made it to the end of my street where I always turn onto my street, my heart dropped when I saw the van at the next corner. Judging by how weird and slick the driver in the van was acting earlier, I had a feeling when I was walking back into my neighborhood that he'd take the front entrance to try and catch me off guard. I immediately started running while then telling Michael what was happening. Michael was also yelling at me to run and get inside. Luckily, my house was 3 houses away when I turned onto my street. I ran like my life depended on it, not looking back. I got to my front door and I hurried typing the code to unlock the door. I then got inside, putting both locks in the door, and I made sure every entrance to the house was locked. I went to check the cameras, and fortunately, the van went in the opposite direction, driving slowly down the street trying to find me. At this point, I knew almost definitely that whoever was in that van was trying to kidnap me. Michael and I started talking more about the situation, and just as I started to calm down, I saw the same van show back up on the cameras, this time driving in the direction I came from. The van started driving a little faster, but a bit more careful, which I assumed the driver to be obsessed with finding me, and then frustrated he lost me. I saw the van circle the block 2 more times until I didn't see it again. I was home alone when this happened, and I was really contemplating about telling my parents since I didn't get the van's plate number or anything like that. Michael strongly considered me to still tell them, and which I did. My parents were really glad that I was safe and knew what to do, and they told me to be more careful moving forward. Like I said, I didn't get a plate number nor a description of anyone in the van, since it looked like any other white van. It really wasn't anything the police could do if we even called them. Ever since then, I haven't walked to that gas station, and whenever I walk around my neighborhood, I always carry some type of protection with me. My name is Robin. This story will consist of 2 stories. Both of these stories took place when I was younger. I'd say I was around 12 to 13. The first took place during the summer. I can't remember the specific day it happened, but me and my cousin had gone for a walk to a park that was less than 5 minutes away. It was a year after the game Pokemon Go had come out, and since my mom was making dinner, we figured we had some time to kill. My cousin, who I'll refer to as Leah, and I walked to the park. We had been hanging out at the park for around 15 minutes playing Pokemon Go, catching Pokemon, and trying to beat the gym at the park. My cousin was pretty new at the game, and I was showing her how it worked. This park has this path that is essentially a circle, so you keep walking, and it'll always bring you straight back to the park's parking lot. While we were walking along this path, my cousin tapped me on the shoulder, and I responded back with, "What?" But she nudged me, and she gave me a really weird look like she wanted me to be quiet. So I then repeated myself in a whisper, "Robin, there's a guy who's been following us," she said softly. I turned around for a brief second to get a good look at the guy. The guy was overweight and had black glasses from what I could remember. At the time, I didn't believe her, and I said she was probably just overthinking it, and that he was probably just walking in the same direction as us. My cousin didn't seem to like my answer, and she still seemed very freaked out. So to show her he wasn't actually following us, we just walked around in the same circle yet again, figuring the guy was walking towards the parking lot to his car. But when we walked the circle again, he followed. At this point, I was now freaking out as well. We began to walk faster and began to devise a plan to lose this guy, but my cousin and I had different plans. Before we could get one figured out, my cousin just bolted and ran home, while my plan was to hide in the women's bathroom. I hid in the bathroom until I then realized my cousin wasn't next to me. I thought to myself, "Fuck, I'm stuck here alone." I didn't know if the guy had seen me go in. I didn't know if he was following me or if he could have gone after my cousin. I was gonna just bolt out of there and try to find her since the guy was walking towards the bathroom. I finally got my shit together, and I built up enough courage to just run for it. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I found my cousin hyperventilating in the driveway right behind my dad's car. At first, my instincts were to chew her the hell out and ask her why the hell she fucking left me behind like that. But when I saw how terrified she was, I decided we should just get inside and calm down. We never told my mom about what happened, since anytime we ever told our mom about anything, she would always somehow pin it on us. She'd always find a way to say it was our fault, so we just never said anything. Alright, here's the next story. The second story happened on the 4th of July, just a year after our park story, and my cousin Leah and I were again at the park near my house watching the fireworks go off. We had already been watching them for a while, and we decided to go back to my house since we saw some bigger fireworks going off closer to my house. We decided to stay a bit longer, and then we would head back to my house. As the fireworks went off, I saw a truck pass by super slow, but I figured they were maybe just looking at the fireworks too or something, or maybe they were lost. Yeah, I wasn't exactly the brightest kid back then, but at the time I never really thought much about it. But a few minutes later, the same truck passed again. It was still going super slow, and at that point I got suspicious, and I then told my cousin, "Dude, that truck has passed by super slow like twice now." My cousin looked at me confused. What truck?" she asked. My cousin hadn't seen the truck, and I didn't want to worry her just in case it really was nothing. So I just said, "Whatever, let's just go home and watch the fireworks from my room." My cousin agreed, but then said, "Hey Robin, what truck were you talking about earlier?" I just told her not to worry about it, and I told her they were probably just lost or something. But as we walked towards my house, I saw the same truck pass by us, and when it did pass us, it literally stopped in the middle of the street, and the passenger side door opened. And again, just like the story before, my cousin bolted home scared shitless, leaving me behind. but this time I managed to start running a few seconds after she did. We then hid behind my dad's and my brother's car since they were both parked in the driveway. The truck then slowly passed by as if they were looking for us, and when they didn't see us, they then immediately sped off. When the car sped off, we immediately ran inside and then locked ourselves in my room. We started watching movies to try and calm ourselves down. We started thinking back to the very first incident that we had at the park. We made a promise to never make trips outside the house anytime close to or after dark. We started thinking, what would have happened if they hadn't parked their cars on the driveway that day? Would they have found us and taken us? Would we ever be seen again? We don't know. And ever since those two incidents, I always carry pepper spray anytime I'm out. What's even more unbelievable is that these stories aren't the only ones we have of being followed. My cousin and I don't exactly have the best luck, I guess. Always be aware of your surroundings. Nowadays, I'm always hyper-focused on everything around me, and whenever I walk out by myself, I always carry my pepper spray and knife that my boyfriend gave me. My mom thinks me having pepper spray, let alone a knife, isn't safe, so I have to hide them whenever I go out. Luckily to this day, I have yet to use them, but now I'm not the same ignorant kid that I was back then, and I'm not afraid to pepper spray anyone or even use the knife if I have to, and I really hope it stays that way. I hope that this story encourages people to at least carry some sort of self-defense tool. You just may actually need it someday. So the story involves my two friends and I. I was 13 at the time, my friend Lana was 14, and Jack, who was also 14. Lana, Jack, and I were hanging out at around 8 or 9 p.m., and since this was in March, it was essentially pitch black outside, aside for some street lights. Near where we live, there's a field, just like a big patch of grass with a small strip of trees and a playground beside it. We decided to go to the playground and hang around there for a bit. While we were there, we were just having fun and probably being too loud. Well, we ended up hearing rustling in the strip of trees from behind us, but we didn't think too much of it, and we even joked around about it being a skinwalker or some other type of cryptid creature. We moved around and started talking about whatever, until we then heard screaming, like literal loud cries of distress out of nowhere. Jack took off running, and he shouted for us to run too, which we didn't. Lana and I stayed in the park, looking to see who and where the screaming was coming from. We eventually made it out to be a woman who appeared to be all alone. Once we located her, Lana started making her way out of the park and in the direction of the woman. I went over to Lana and I had asked her what she was doing. She said that we need to go see if the woman was okay, and I essentially said absolutely not. In my mind, I came to the conclusion that perhaps this woman was having an episode, or maybe she was even on drugs, which would make her potentially very dangerous and unpredictable. But Lana came to the conclusion that maybe this woman had been attacked, robbed, or even assaulted, and that she needed comforting if so. I tried to explain my thoughts, but I didn't really word it very well, and Lana didn't understand why I didn't want to approach her. I said the best way we could help is to probably call someone, but Lana didn't fully listen, and she started to make her way to the woman. I really didn't want Lana to go all alone, so I went along too. By the way, the woman is still screaming at this point, and when she noticed us walking over to her, she stopped screaming completely. The screaming and crying ended just like it did when it had started. It was as if it was a switch that she turned on and off. She started screaming when she first seen us, and then stopped when she seen us approach her. This, of course, is red flag number 1, and red flag number 2 is that she completely changed her route, and she then started going to a completely different direction. She was luring us somewhere, and we fell right for it. She stopped walking once she got to a street light. This is when Lana changed her mind about comforting her. We now noticed that this woman had no tears in her eyes and no other signs of crying, She didn't even look distressed. She was staring blankly at us, with her hand in the pocket of her hoodie, almost like she was holding something. She had blonde hair, and her clothes were tattered and mismatched. We couldn't tell what age she was. She could have quite literally been anywhere from 16 to 30. We went past her, and she just watched us walk all the way down the street. Note, from where she was standing, she could have seen all of our homes. Anyway, we eventually reunited with Jack here, and he started low-key scolding us for not running when he told us to. We were all watching the woman, and she was watching us as well. We were all just staring at one another. Then she turned around, then walked back into the pitch-black field. This gave us a horrible sinking feeling deep in our stomachs. One that's really hard to describe, but just dread that felt like it was crushing us. We decided to then hide behind someone's car. We were still just staring into the darkness, watching to see if she would eventually come back out. And she did, but not alone. Her and about 4 or 5 people dressed head to toe in all black walked out of the darkness and right underneath the street light. We all started freaking out at this point, and we got an awful feeling that got about 10 times worse. Now, at this point, we were closest to my house, so we ran there and we ran straight to the door, but it was locked. I had forgotten that my parents went out to dinner. From my garden, we could now see the woman and the others, as well as a black car that drove up to them, and they then jumped right inside the car. This was when we made our way to Lana's house and then ran inside, but the people must have seen which house we went into, because we watched the car pull up outside of her house from an upstairs window. The car had literally stayed there for like 20 or 30 minutes, before then eventually just driving away. And fortunately, nothing else has happened since. We never did report it to the police, or even told our parents for that matter. You know, out of fear of being wrong or not being believed, I guess. The memory of her walking into the darkness and walking out not alone still haunts me. I try to tell myself that it was just a sick joke, but it's just really weird. We all still talk about it sometimes, and I really wonder if the woman was a willing participant, or if she herself was also a victim. I guess we'll never really know. I want to tell this story to warn others. I'm an 18-year-old female, and I live in Maryland, USA. I work at a very popular burger restaurant. I work at the payment window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can really make someone's day just a little bit better. Just this same night, just before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me that I was so fucking happy, and she loved me for it. That gave me the courage and energy to survive this next interaction. I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing. They think I'm naive. Maybe I am, a lot more than I thought. I'm fully aware of the dangers of trafficking. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, then laughed like it was some kind of joke between 2 friends. This is not uncommon. It's an old man thing. No red flags yet. I told him his total, and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it was just an old man thing. Not concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt, and he asked if that was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that. He perked up. At this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s to 70s, driving a small white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face, and he was holding a phone to his ear this entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he had moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I really believe he was recording me. At no point did he speak into the phone or acknowledge it in any way. He then probed with more pressing questions. Here's the thing. I have the same last name as someone from US history. Most old people really like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name. He didn't reflect or laugh. He just accepted and continued asking questions. That's when I started to get this sinking feeling. He still owed me change, and I told him. He grabbed another $1 and he handed it to me, but he wouldn't let go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting creeped out. He wouldn't let go of the money, and he was practically drooling for more data about me. I gave him a name I don't use, and he smiled, finally letting go. I got his change, and I told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window, and I told one of my coworkers about the weird experience. He returned 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction, and I was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger. My stomach dropped when I saw his face. Now, I have many regulars, all of whom I'd be happy to see. I really hope he doesn't become one. I'll call the police. He smiled and said, "Hey, the one with the last name." I smiled back, and I wish for the days when we all wore masks. I tell him his total, and he makes me chase the money yet again. For the entire time, he had his phone against his ear facing me. He starts asking me even more intimate questions about me. I lie or dodge them the best I can, giving him 0 correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Here's some of the questions he asked me. How often do you work? What time do you leave? How old are you? For that one, I knew he wouldn't leave without a number, and I had a nasty feeling the younger wouldn't be the better. So I said, probably 20s. He then joked about me being legal. I made a face and I tried to get his change even faster. Then he asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him that boys were trouble. He specifically talked about himself, and he said he'd treat me right. I handed him his receipt, and I told him to have a great night. He then threw his hands in the air, then sang, "Aw, come on, don't be like that. I'll treat you right." I then shut my window, and I then said, "Bye." He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his question about when I got off work, I really believed he was watching the restaurant. I was shaking by this time, and I called my mom. She immediately drove up. I talked to my manager, and I was a little unsure of the car's color, so he checked the camera for me. Big shout out to my manager. He's the best. I continued at my window, watching for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I left an hour early, and I gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window, and he agreed. These interactions are unfortunately what caused formerly happy and cheerful service workers to become sour and quiet. I think I'm going to be taking a couple of days off. I had already had another job lined up, and I'm really excited to start it. Thank you all for taking the time to listen. Update. So I wanted to mention a few extra things. I didn't mean to make light of trafficking victims with my story. I did feel trapped by this guy, and I felt real fear he would be waiting for me, no matter when he thought I got off shift. I don't have a car, and I take myself home on a bike after dark. I think it would be very easy to follow and trap me. I did not tell him how I got home. Also, in case it's confusing and I didn't elaborate enough on his phone, he held it facing me for the extent of both of our interactions, roughly 5 to 8 minutes, and he wouldn't leave, never moving it or lowering it. I have 2 guesses. He was recording me, and he could be possibly preparing to use that video or send it to someone. Or he was on a call with someone listening in who I can't identify. Trafficking was not my first thought. I'm more concerned about how easy I would be to kidnap at night on a dark suburban road. And yes, after kidnapping, any number of things could happen to me. Just because I have a job and people assume that my father lives in state doesn't mean I shouldn't feel threatened. That's the reason I left so quickly by car with a trusted adult who could pick me up. The reason I made this post was to warn others in my area. That's why I gave a description of him and his car. Please be safe out there, everyone. Seriously. Back when I was in 7th grade, I was actually pretty naive and immature for my age. The story is about my ex, who we'll call Candace for the sake of privacy reasons. Me and her actually met through one of our friends. We'll call our friend Maria. Maria is actually very popular within her school and social group, so pretty much everyone knew her. One day, Maria invited me to the skating rink along with her friends, and I said yes, because why the hell not? When we got to the skating rink, Maria introduced me to Candace, and she was honestly really nice when I first talked to her. She asked me if I wanted a drink, but I said no thanks, and I figured she was just being nice. After a couple of hours of badass skating, I was finally done for the day. I went to go sit down by the benches, and I basically blew all of my money that my dad gave me. Later on, Candace started talking to me again. I wasn't really interested in what she was talking about, but I just wanted to be nice, so I still had conversation with her. Later on, she had asked me for my number, and I gave it to her. Now, I had only known this girl for not even 2 hours, so you can imagine the shock I had when she came up to me and said that she liked me. I was a dumbass at the time, so I asked her in what way, and she said she wanted to be my girlfriend. Again, I was really shocked, but at the same time, I had never had a girlfriend before, so I said sure, and I said we could start dating. Well, after about 2 months in, shit was already hitting the fan. She wanted to talk all the time, and she had already started planning out our future together. She said she wanted to marry me and have my kids, so I flipped the fuck out and I told her hell no, I'm not ready for any of those things. So I ended up breaking up with her. This bitch ended up losing her mind and going crazy, constantly stalking me, and she wouldn't leave me the fuck alone. And all of this happened because I agreed to date some random girl that I met at the skating rink. So yeah, guys, do not do what I did. If you don't know someone well enough, don't agree to date them. When I was a freshman in high school, I was in a very toxic relationship. The girl that I was dating would threaten to kill herself or harm herself if I ever brought up any of the problems I had in the relationship, and she sexually assaulted me as well. When I finally got the courage to break up with her, she went ballistic. She had made up a bunch of lies to try and guilt trip me into getting back together with her, and she even got her friends to harass me. Some of the harassment was tame, but others weren't. And to give more context, she lives about 2 blocks away from me. On multiple occasions, she would walk by my house with her friends and throw rocks at it. She even dented my car once with them. I know this because we have security cameras. At lunch, she would constantly come up to me and call me all kinds of different names, and I would literally just sit there and take it. One of the worst cases of the harassment was when she hacked into my school account a day before my birthday, and she had actually emailed my math teacher, "Fuck you." And unfortunately, it wasn't able to be traced back, so I had to take the backlash from it. But after that, I changed my password, and we had to do mediation with counselors multiple times. Finally, everything came to a close at the very end of the school year. I got called into the principal's office during the computer coding class, and I went in there thinking that I was on attendance probation or something. But they then showed me the second email that was sent from my account the day before. This girl had spent months trying to figure out my password to send another email. This time, the email sent then read, "I hope you fucking die, you annoying whore. and it was sent to my English teacher. This time, however, the email was actually able to be traced back to her, and she ended up getting suspended for a week. After this incident, I was literally scared for about a year, and I thought that she would break into my house and kill my whole family. She really was that psychotic. Every time I see her in the hallway, I feel like I'm going to have a panic attack. I really hope none of you end up with a crazy ex like mine. It really sucks. This was my worst first date. My name is Anna, and I was 26 years old when this happened. I had been talking to a guy named Stefan that I met on an online dating site. Everything was really going great. He was charming, funny, and he really seemed to be a great guy. We talked over the phone for about 2 weeks, then decided to meet. I put my guard down, and I invited him over to my place. I know, stupid idea, but I was already head over heels for this guy. The day finally came, and I was so happy when he arrived. We went out shopping together, and we bought things we needed. We came back to my place and started making dinner. So far, everything was perfect. He was even really amazing in the kitchen, and he helped make the food. After dinner, we had sat down on the couch relaxing. This is where everything went downhill. He started shaking, and I asked if he was okay. He said that he had a confession. He said that he was a veteran, and he had been to Afghanistan, and that he saw things he was really traumatized by. He then started to go into great detail to explain what he saw. I'm not going to repeat the absolute horror that he told me, because I was actually traumatized myself for about a year from this. But he told me a lot of war stories, things that he told me he would go to jail for telling me. I was in shock, but it only got worse. He started to act really strange, and I asked if I could do anything for him. This is when he told me that everything right now in the present moment felt like a cartoon for him. Every object he thought he could just make it disappear, and that he could draw new things and it would come to life. Then he started to remove all his clothes, because he said it burned on his skin. I was totally freaking out at this point, and I was getting terrified. I knew then that he had a psychosis, and it was time to act. So I called his mom, and she told me that he was dangerous, and that I needed to call the psych ward. So that's what I did. They told me that I needed to call another ward from his own town, so I did that. Meanwhile, this dangerous man sat naked in my living room, and he started laughing. He truly looked so evil. I didn't even recognize him at this point. So the psych ward that I called said that since he was in my town, they couldn't help, and that I needed to call the psych ward from my own town. So once again, that's what I did. This cycle just continued, as none of these psych wards wanted to take responsibility for this. I finally just had enough, and I called the police. Now I'm in Denmark, so instead of 911, we dialed 112. So the police came and got him, and he was finally admitted to the psych ward in my town. After this all happened, I was totally broken from this experience. How could things start so good and end up so wrong? Over the next week, he ended up calling me from the psych ward, telling me that he ended up attacking a female staff member because he thought that she was a villain in his cartoon. He punched her in the throat and stomach, and he tried to strangle her as well, but she was eventually saved by the other staff. He told me that it was a really good thing that he saw me as a hero in his cartoon, because if he had seen me as a bad guy, he would have attacked me in the same way, and nobody could have saved me. This was the last time I ever had any contact with him. I'm now 28 years old, and I'm still very traumatized by this. I know that this is going to be relatively lame compared to the other scary stories that you usually get, but here goes. I'm not using anyone's name to protect their identity and my own. What's scary about my story is that tons of people go through this every day. It's not a rare occurrence. Rather than a one-time scary experience, I lived through hell for a few years. You really think you know someone, and then they turn into something else. I did try and leave and get help, but no one believed me for like 2 to 3 years due to the fact that I'm bipolar. I got pregnant right out of high school, and my family was very religious, so to appease them, I decided that I would marry the father/my boyfriend, which they didn't even ask. I just blurted it out right after the part about my pregnancy. After all, we weren't happy together until we were married and I was in my second trimester, that is. At the time, we were living at my parents' house, as he had a job but was also still in high school. This was because he was a year behind due to excessive absences, and I had combined my junior and senior years to graduate a year early. He had started saying really harsh things to me and making comments suggesting that I would be a shitty mother. When I gave birth, I had to get stitches down there, and postpartum depression. We were on an air mattress that was so painful for me to get up from, but he would never help with the baby, so I had to. His excuse not to get up at night was school the next morning. So yeah, the relationship went downhill fast as he got more aggressive and really angry at me for things. He wasn't affectionate in any way other than wanting sex. He wouldn't call me anything other than my name, and he wouldn't hug, hold hands, cuddle, or anything. For me, that's one of my love languages, so I felt very unloved. While I was with him, I became extremely depressed and self-loathing. I was sent to psychiatric hospitals and forced to stay for at least 10 days each time because I was suicidal. He lied to doctors, saying that I would choke him and be violent. The guy was cheating on me, but had everyone convinced that I was the one sleeping around, which I'll explain shortly. He also didn't admit to cheating until way after our divorce, even though it was obvious. He would gaslight and control me. I couldn't leave the house except to see my parents or go to therapy. He refused to have anything to do with my family, who were only ever kind and loving to him. I couldn't spend money because it was his money. During this marriage, he would come home from work, which closed at 9 p.m., at 3 a.m., telling me he went out with his coworkers, and that he also had to pet sit for a female coworker and go over to her place alone to return the pets. I asked to go along one time, and he very quickly and angrily said no. He also wouldn't let me keep my own pet cat at our apartment, yet he would keep hers there. He expected me to be the perfect housewife when I could barely take care of myself sometimes from how depressed I was. He wanted me to cook and clean, which I wouldn't have minded if I was treated right. He decided to go vegan or something one time, so I would make him special dinners just for him, and if he didn't like it, I'd have to make 2 or 3 different dinners that night. He would make me say horrible, perverse things of all kinds, and some things about me and my own female friends during intercourse, which he demanded daily. One time we were doing things, and he said something, I can't remember what, and I told him I was done, and I didn't want to do it anymore. But he just kept going until he was done. Then he gaslighted me, saying I didn't say that. He would burst into fits of anger and berate me over the smallest things, like not cleaning a spot on the counter from something I had just baked, sometimes in front of my friends. For example, one time we were watching a movie and putting fresh sheets on the bed. I was goofing around and I got under the fitted sheet as he put it on, and we were both laughing at first, and then he suddenly muttered, "Stupid bitch." I was mortified. This was the first time he'd ever called me a bad name like that. This man threatened to shoot a puppy for God's sake. Physically, I only remember him intentionally hurting me once, but once they do it once, it only gets worse from there. Once again, we were joking around. I had flicked his nipple, so he suddenly grabbed my wrist and then bent it very far. He also did this right in front of his friend. The same friend he invited to stay with us for 2 weeks, even when he was gone from work and I was alone with the baby, and this man that I didn't even know. This friend was really sweet to me and was supportive, and also talk to me about what I was going through. One night after about a week or two, the baby was staying with her grandmother and my husband was at work. His family invited me to a family party that was down the road from me, so I walked and met him there. I wanted to just have a good time and let loose. I was probably still 18, maybe 19 at the time, so not legally of drinking age, but the family didn't care. I had never actually drank before, but everyone there apart from the kids were drinking. I was immediately offered a Jell-O shot, which I very awkwardly downed. His middle-aged uncle hit on me a few times, which was creepy, and he also had another uncle hanging around us who was probably 30. Over the next few hours, I believe I had 9-ish beers, possibly more, I can't remember. Anyway, I start to black out at this point. All I remember after is being carried to a car, my drunk ass not even knowing what the hell's going on around me, and I'm laughing. I guess I thought they were going to be gentlemen and just drive me home. The next thing I know, I'm being carried by my ex-husband's friend and 30-something uncle through an old trailer home. Then I see him on top of me, and I'm naked, and the uncle's there too, whispering something in my ear. Then I'm carried to the bathroom. Then I wake up. I'm now on a dingy bare small mattress next to the friend. My inner thighs are covered in blood. I must have been in shock, and it's taken me a long time to actually realize that this was rape. Here I was thinking he's a nice guy, and I was drunk, so I guess we got carried away, huh? I was the one who took the responsibility at the time. I was also panicking because it was the next day, so I knew I'd be in trouble, and I had no clue where I was. The trailer was filthy, and there were more people there, even though I got dressed and left the room. Nobody there acted like anything was wrong, so I went with it. They took me to, of all things, his grandma's house for a bit. She wasn't there, but I had used the bathroom to clean up. I was still bleeding pretty heavily. I also reeked of marijuana because they kept smoking. My husband kept calling, but I was too afraid to answer. So he then texted me after a while, saying that my baby needed to go to the hospital. I was panicked, worried sick about my child. So I then had the guys drive me somewhere else where my husband came and then picked me up. I was humiliated and ashamed. We actually did go to the ER. I probably smelled like a lot of things. I really wish that I realized I was assaulted and got a rape kit done there. But of course, I didn't think that way back then. While we waited in a room with our baby, he had asked me, "Did you fuck him?" And I just said yes. He told everyone. Everyone thought that I was a dirty cheater. I hadn't even had the chance to realize what had really happened to me yet, but my reputation was trashed. Naturally, this was leverage for him to use against me. He got worse. I was locked up. I was hospitalized in psychiatric centers a lot. The guilt and shame I felt were unbearable. He insisted that I go to SA, which is Sex Addicts Anonymous, which was really uncomfortable because after being assaulted, I was sitting in a room just full of men. I never even wanted sex. He was the one that demanded it and wanted gross things and used porn daily. All I ever wanted was just to be held and told that I mattered. He threatened to prove that I was an unfit mother and take my child away if I ever tried to leave. He also threatened suicide once when I was staying with a friend to get me to come back. He cried on the phone and everything, but once I was in his truck, he was fine. I was trapped, unloved. I was desperate to get away. I stayed with my best friend in their apartment. This became a whole different toxic relationship itself, but that's a different story. I was drinking a lot at the time to try and cope with my problems. I would drink until I blacked out every time. She would also like to invite random men over. One day when I was there, she was gone and was on the couch, barely awake and still drunk from the night before. Now, like a week before this, she had hit up some middle-aged man to flirt, and he offered to hook us up with some edibles sometime. I was very uncomfortable, so I just stayed quiet, but somehow he ended up getting my number. This guy was at least in his 40s. So back to this day, I get a text from that same guy. I don't remember the conversation other than he was coming over to drop off the stuff. When he got there, I wasn't thinking clearly about the situation, so I opened the door for him. He saw that I was alone and drunk, and he pushed his way in. He took advantage of me, and I didn't even bother fighting back. I just waited for it to be over. Later that day, I had told my friend what happened. She immediately told my husband's parents that I slept with the guy. And yeah, they really hated me for a while. I was absolutely humiliated, and I felt worthless at that point. I ended up back at the apartment with my husband. We were fighting all the time, and he would scream and cuss at me right in front of our now toddler. I'd ask him not to, and that would just make him even more mad. Because I felt like such a worthless piece of shit, I thought that if I left him, no one would want me. I guess it was all the gaslighting that was getting to me. But one night, when he came back from suddenly leaving due to another angry outburst, I was weeping. I went to him begging for a chance to change. I said that I would even try ECT, which is electroshock therapy for those who don't know. I said that I would do this if I had to, and I reached to embrace him. He just shoves me back, saying, "What the fuck?" I just ran to our room, crying on the bed. After about a minute or two, he came up and started screaming and cussing at me, pointing in my face and telling me what a worthless freeloader I was. I looked out the doorway crying, and I saw my 2-year-old at the top of the stairs behind the bars watching us, just looking scared and confused. Seeing my baby like that, that's what made me finally get the courage to leave. I got up, picked up my baby, went downstairs, grabbed the keys to my car, and then drove to my parents' house. I cried hysterically the whole way, completely overwhelmed and afraid of the future of the unknown. This event has traumatized my child, and they've asked me tons of questions about it over the years. Since separating, he has inappropriately touched me twice, and he also propositioned me once to be friends with benefits. I've also been diagnosed with PTSD since this relationship. He now treats me civilly. He even jokes with me and sends me memes on occasion. We mostly get along as long as I agree to the things he wants, as I'm still afraid to upset him. He's improved as we got older, and I do still care about him as a person. I'm now in a happy and healthy relationship, and I never drink, and I'm much more emotionally stable now. There's so much more that I could really add to this story, but it's already very long, so I'm gonna end it here. Thank you all for listening, and be careful out there. It was my freshman year of college. I had went away to Iowa for school. It was my first time being away from home and not knowing a single person besides my ex who decided to go to the same school as me. My school had the football players move in earlier than the rest of the freshmen and transfers, and so the football players were around helping people move into dorms. I had one guy helping my family while my mom's sister and I went to the finance aid office to sign some paperwork. Jumping to when classes begin, I was a music major at the time, vocal performance to be more specific. My classes were very jam-packed, and I had a strict schedule so I could fit in times to eat. This will be relevant later on in the story. A kid in my class was taking up some of my voice lessons time with the teacher, so I told him I'll just bring him the homework to the cafeteria after my lessons. He agreed to it, so we exchanged social media so I can let him know when to meet me. I don't ever give out my number to strangers. After my lessons, I ran home to change into some sweats. This is important, so keep this in mind. I did this before going to dinner. Fast forward to dinner time, and I had met up with the kid at the cafeteria. I gave him the homework, and we parted ways. I ate, and then I went back to my room to do homework. My roommate was at study group, so she wasn't home. Well, about 5 minutes after getting home, he had messaged me on Snapchat and he had asked me for help with the homework. I told him to send me his questions via Snapchat and I'll try to help him that way. He insisted on coming to my room, even though I protested about it. He eventually stopped messaging me, so I assumed he was over it and would just leave me be. Well, about 10 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. He randomly showed up at my dorm, though I never told him what my room number was. He pushed his way in, so I agreed to help him with the homework, and then I said he has to leave. He said okay, and so we just set up my desk. Now, I sat as far away as possible from him while still being close enough to help him. After a few minutes, he had put his hand on my thigh. I asked him to remove it or I'd tell him to leave. He removed his hand for a few minutes before then putting it back. I stood up and I then went to walk away from him, but he had grabbed my wrist and then pinned me on my bed, which was right next to the desk. He then ripped off my clothes and I remember hearing the tear of the fabric. Then, not going into detail, he raped me. After he was done, he grabbed his stuff, saying he was ready to go. I walked him out because I thought I would get in trouble if I didn't, because it was after hours where we had to escort people walking around the building. As he was leaving, he actually said that it was A1 for him. I just went back to my room and just laid there staring at the tiles on the floor while crying. My roommate got home and I had tried to tell her what had happened, but she didn't care enough to stay awake and listen. The next day, I woke up late for class, so I didn't get to shower. This will be important, as you may know if you shower after, it can wash away evidence. I rushed to get ready and go to class. I had this class with him yet again, so I sat away from him on the completely opposite side of the room. He actually had the audacity to message me on Snapchat halfway through the class, and I lost it. I grabbed my stuff and I ran out of the room. My friend at the time had talked me going to the dean. The dean was helpful at first, but then after a while he told me I was just trying to ruin his life and football career, even though he raped me. Regardless, they said they would have to call my mother and tell her, and I panicked because I hadn't even told her yet. So I left the dean's office and I went to call my mom. My mom convinced me to go to the hospital after I told her that I hadn't had a chance to take a shower yet. My plan was to do it as soon as I got off the phone with her. Fast forward to the hospital, and my roommate came with me. The rape kit stated there was trauma in the lower region of my body, as well as an allergic reaction to the latex of a condom that I didn't notice he used. My roommate was there with me the whole rape kit until the cops came in. They sent male officers into my room while I was having the vaginal exam. The officers asked me what I was wearing and what I did to provoke him, which led me to start crying and shutting down. They then told me they didn't think anything could be done, and they even asked me if I felt comfortable enough to message my rapist telling him that what he did to me was wrong. I got hysterical at this point, and the doctor, who was already upset that they sent male cops into my room, told them they needed to leave. That's when my roommate left, and then took the cops to gather the sweats that I was wearing when the assault happened. When I got back to campus that night, I ended up moving dorms. The next morning, I went back to the dean with my roommate, and I asked for an order of protection against him. They did give it to me, but then I was the one taken out of my classes while the school did their investigation. By this point, the attacker found out where my new room was, because he was entering the building when he wasn't supposed to, and he had made friends with the girl across the hall from me. I would come home with things written on the dry erase board that I had on my door, calling me a liar and a whore, and much more. I ended up having my first suicide attempt after 6 years clean of self-harm. My partner, who was just a friend at the time, had sat outside my room until I would open the door for him and show him I was okay. He brought me all of my favorite snacks and some flowers. I moved yet again, Where I moved to was a very closed off area. Most people didn't even know it was a hallway because the door that closed off the hall looked like a janitor's closet. Important to note, I didn't tell anyone where my new room was besides my partner who was with me all the time, and my friends who didn't associate with anyone I used to be friends with. Then I found out that when the police confiscated the clothes I was wearing, they also took the clothes he was wearing and the condom he used that he kept as a trophy. However, with all of this evidence, the police still dropped the charges though because there wasn't enough evidence. The school investigation was even worse because it ruined my life more than his. Not only did it take me from classes, but it ruined relationship with friends, etc. I eventually had to close the school investigation because it was starting to impact me academically. But by then, I was already failing most of my classes beyond repair. He then started to stalk me wherever I went, taking videos and pictures of me and sending them to my professors, saying that I was lying to the point that they asked me if I could get over what he did to me if he just apologized to me. He again found out where my new room was, and he tried to get me in trouble with the RAs by saying I had things on campus that shouldn't be on campus. The RAs came into my room at 4 a.m. I don't blame them for this because they felt horrible for it, but they had to investigate the accusations, and they searched my room, tearing it apart. One night my partner and I were hanging out with some friends when I got a text message from an unknown number and then a snap from my old roommate, the one who was with me when all of this took place. My rapist was now dating my roommate, and he had sent me a video of them having sex. I flipped out and I took it to the dean the very next morning, and they wouldn't even reopen the case. I completely blocked out everything and everybody I hung out with when I first got onto campus. The rest of the school year went okay because of this, but at the end of the year, I went home and I had to take time off school because my GPA was so low due to failing those classes, and I had to go to community college before I could enroll in another university. All that being said, I don't want anyone to think of me as a victim. I'm healing now, and I'm still with the same guy 7 years later. We're actually getting married in October 2025. I'm also finally about to graduate with my BA. I did change my major to English though. So many good things have happened to me since then that have helped my healing process. I also had trauma before this because my father is very abusive, but that's a story for another day. Who knows? Maybe I'll share it one day. If you can take anything from the story, let it be known that you can heal from whatever trauma you go through. I was hanging out with my roommate Robert, who's also my best friend, and we decided to go do a late night walk outside. We had walked from my house and into the woods about 4 blocks away. It was about midnight when we arrived, and we walked into the woods for about a mile. We then came across an abandoned building with no windows and no doors. Our curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to go inside the building to have a look around. When we got inside, we had took out our phones and turned on our flashlights so we could see what was inside and where we were going. Well, here's where it gets terrifying. When we shined our flashlights around, we saw on the wall in big capital letters and black spray paint that said things like, "Help me," as well as, "Get me out of here." There were also pentagrams everywhere, along with spray painted sayings of, "Get out." Robert and I were freaking out really bad at this point, but we decided to go into another room in the hallway. Right when we got there, we were then hit with an incredibly awful odor. It was so bad that it had made us gag to the point of almost vomiting. We continued to shine our flashlights around, and we saw on the wall that said, "I warned you," in big capital letters, and then we shined into the floor, and what we saw made us scream. There was a woman's body laying on the floor drenched in blood with stab wounds. She also looked to be in her late 40s. We had assumed that that was the cause of the bad smell. We both screamed so loudly that not only did it echo all throughout the entire building, but it felt like our vocal cords were going to wear off. The sight of the body literally made me sick, and I threw up. I did it so much and so hard that it seriously felt like I was vomiting out my guts. Not only that, but it had freaked me out so badly that I literally ended up shitting my pants. Robert also threw up from the sight and smell of the body. After we were done doing what we were doing, we then ran the hell out of there and called 911. The police and paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, and we told them everything. They took the woman away in a body bag, and we gave our numbers to the police so they could contact us for updates on the situation. Then they left. Robert and I decided to head back to our house after that horrific incident. The entire walk home we were covered in our own vomit, and there was also shit running down my legs inside my pants. I know that's not the point, but the sight of the dead body really freaked us the fuck out. When we finally got home, we went into our own bathrooms and then showered to take away the stink from the vomit and whatnot. We both then discarded our soiled clothes. We didn't get any sleep for 2 nights after that, and we now have awful trauma from that night, and now we're both scared to walk outside at night. However, the next day the police called us on our phones and they told us about the woman. She was apparently stabbed 17 times, 9 times in the chest and 8 times in her stomach. They found her killer. It was her ex-boyfriend, and he was arrested for murdering her. Apparently he killed her because she dumped him for another man. Then after about a year later, we found out he was sentenced to life in prison. Robert and I can still remember the disturbing image of the woman, and it still gives us nightmares to this day. That night will forever scar us. My name is Kathy, and this happened to me in 1998. I don't remember the exact month, but it was before my birthday, which is in August. I was 29 and I was pregnant with my youngest daughter and my last born. I was at the Atwater music store in California with my friend T, while our other halves were next door at the recording studio with Carrie Stainer. T and I didn't know that he was there, and he had not been caught yet. Our dumbass other halves decided to bring Carrie Stainer over to the music store where T and I were at, and they left that evil person with us 2 ladies for about 10 minutes, which felt like forever. T and I were in the back of the music store. Now, she's a big lady, and I'm a little lady. So when the guys left to go get them beer at the liquor store, Carrie Stainer stayed. And all I can tell you is that I've never seen such evil eyes like his. If looks could kill, just by the way he looked at us, I felt that feeling. I then said that T and I need to go sit, because the front music store is where the only chair was. I will never forget the way he looked at me like he was looking through my soul. T and I then went to the front of the music store, and then the dumbasses got back and Carrie Stainer left. T and I told the guys what happened, and they told us that he had a fight with his girlfriend and he told her that he was going to kill her. Needless to say, T and I completely went off on the dumbasses, and not even a week later he got caught. I know in my heart that T and I and my unborn baby would have been dead if the dumbasses were gone any longer than they were. The story is extremely dark. Trigger warnings for sexual assault and suicide, as well as prescription medication. I feel like enough years have passed that I can write about this. I can finally get through it without breaking down. This story is about Crystal, my soul sister, as well as me, Becca. I met her in elementary school in about 1986. She was a quiet kid, and I was too. I think that's why we clicked so well. We became fast friends. She always got bullied in school, and I always tried to look out for her. I accidentally broke a boy's leg once when I shoved him for picking on her. Life got a little more complicated as we got older. Her dad was a functioning alcoholic, and her mom struggled with mental illness. I reckon that she had shock treatments at some point and was never the same. I was told that, and I never asked anything more about it. Her brother was a real piece of work who ended up doing some sketchy things to her and I. We were absolutely terrified to tell anyone, and it kept up. The things that did happen really messed the two of us up, and even to this day I'm still affected by what we saw, as well as what we were forced to do. Counseling has helped me come to terms with everything that happened. In 1997, we were in the 9th grade. Her mom got a new apartment. It had door locks and it seemed to be safe. She was so excited and she had begged me to stay over. We were under the impression that her brother wouldn't be there, and we had a great time. We dozed off probably around 11 p.m. Several hours had passed, and it was nearly 2:17 a.m. when I was then startled awake. At first, I wasn't really sure what the heck was happening, but then I realized someone was on top of me. There was a hand clasped over my mouth and a knife to my throat. It seemed like time had stood still. I completely disassociated, and I mentally blocked out what was happening. It was painful and rough, and I wasn't strong enough at the time to fight the person off. I was beaten, bruised, and violated. I just acted as if I had passed out. He must have been convinced or satisfied, because I then felt him walk away. I already knew in my heart what was happening next, and there was no way I was going to let her brother do that to her again. I waited until his back was turned, and then when he was starting to do unspeakable things to her, I grabbed the butter knife off the dresser that we had previously used to prop open the window. All of the pain and hurt that I was feeling went into savagely jabbing him and stabbing him. I got him about 7 times before I had the crap knocked out of me. I was jolted away by paramedics giving me the smelling salts. I felt the IV getting jammed into my arm. I remember hearing the medic telling me we were safe and that we were both going to be okay, and that we'd be off to the hospital in no time. There was a lot going around us the entire time. We were separated, and we both had to have stitches and had an SAEK ran, a sexual assault evidence kit. I felt so dirty and ashamed. I was also extremely terrified that I was going to jail for jabbing him. I remember crying and apologizing. The cop had looked as if she was going to bawl with me. She held my hand and assured me that had I not defended us, we wouldn't be here. He admitted to saying that he was going to destroy us and do as much damage to our insides as possible. Court happened, and we both had to testify. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, and he has to register as a sex offender for the rest of his miserable life. We both received heavy therapy and counseling. High school rolled around, and I ended up at a different high school than her, but she eventually came to my school in the 11th grade for a year. I was still her friend, but not as close. I didn't want to think of it or even be reminded of it. I just focused on school and work. I was working all the hours I could after school so I could buy my first car, a 1987 Buick Regal souped up with slamming sounds, and I got my first place. I graduated top 15% with straight A's as well as honors. Crystal and I drifted more over time. She had 2 kids and she eventually got married to a scumbag. They had made some bad decisions together. When I talked to her in 2002, she had just lost custody and her 2 boys got adopted out. I ended up having my own children and moving out of state to get a fresh start. I went to college, became a CNA, and then phlebotomist, and I became certified to give hospice care. In 2014, she had reached out to my parents as they were always good to her. She had had another son by then. His name was Jesse. She was really struggling a lot, and I let her back into my life. I moved in with her and I helped take care of her boy. By this point, Crystal was heavily addicted to Xanax, methamphetamines, and pain medications. I get it. She needed to numb herself. She always went big and never felt numb enough. By Christmas of 2014, she was on a downward spiral, and I knew it wouldn't end well. The last day I got to be with her was January 5th, 2015. She had asked me to watch her boy while she went to McDonald's. She returned 2 hours later messed up with no food. She was staying with her mom and her boyfriend at the time. They had previously taken her medication away to give it to her as needed. She couldn't handle not having and controlling that much medication on her own. It was absolutely clear she was on something when she came back. I later found out that it was oxy and fentanyl. She was snooping, and unfortunately she found her medication. She handed me a handful and said bottoms up. I yelled at her and I took away her medicine bottle from her. I let her mom know and then gave them back her bottles. She wouldn't let us know how many she took, so I always kept an eye on her. At one point she got up and she was wandering around at some point, and I thought she was good. What I didn't know is that she took a large amount of narcotic pain medication, as well as benzos, cold medicine, Adderall, and anything else that she could find. I went to her room to check on her after feeding her son and mine. I had heard noises coming from her room, gurgling and thrashing and pounding. I slammed open the door and then flipped on the light. She was blue-lipped, foaming at the mouth. I went into action and I called 911, but I then passed it off to someone. I tried to clear her airway. I sucked out a bunch of foam, which I now know was medicine, and started doing CPR. 5 minutes in, she was getting bluer. There were no respirations, and I felt her ribs break. I kept on, but I eventually stopped. She went from rigid to limp. I knew that I'd truly lost my soul sister. I remember being pulled off of her and being told that I did everything I could. They asked a lot of questions, and it was honestly way too much for me to process. I got arrested for disorderly conduct that night also. Jesse, her son, ended up going to live with his dad, John, who had stepped up and is still a close friend to this day. It's obvious Jesse was really affected by it. I watched his soul get crushed, as there was nothing I could do for him during this time. He ran away from his dad just last year. I'd shot him a text just to make sure he was okay, and make sure he's eating, and see if he's okay on money. He usually responds, but it never gets any easier for me. Inside, I know I'll try to make it up to him, even though I know I can't. I hope his life is full and he finds happiness. As for me, I was just staying numb, just working and on autopilot. I finally got my own life together, and I got off benzos and opiates cold turkey on May 29th, 2018. I was definitely given a second chance, and I'm extremely grateful. I only wish that my soul sister could have had one too. Rest in peace, Crystal. When I was 22 years old, my friends and I had planned a camping trip in central Illinois, USA. My friends' names are Tad and Andrew. We had parked at the entrance to the camping area, and we had a good mile to hike to set up camp where we always have. While on the hike, I had noticed that a man behind us was dressed in all black, and he was slowly walking towards us. I also noticed that when looking back, he was looking for a place to take cover. I asked my friends, "Hey, did you guys see that guy?" "Yeah, I noticed him a while ago, but I didn't want to alarm you guys," Tad said. So I looked back once again, and I then see the man heading back down towards the parking area. I thought to myself, okay, everything's good. When we made it to our camping site, we set up our tents and set up rocks for a campfire so that we could roast hot dogs. We set up our folding chairs and grabbed a cold one. Now, while the sun's going down, we then hear a blood-curdling scream in the distance. We all jump to our feet in the direction the scream came from. Andrew then said, "Dude, should we go investigate that?" I told the guys to grab some flashlights, and if someone's hurt, we wouldn't be able to forgive ourselves for not trying to help. As we're hiking down a hill away from the camp, we noticed a flashing light like an emergency beacon. You know, sometimes as a feature on newer LED flashlights. I then told the guys, "Alright, let's go that way, and let's go see what's causing it." As we got closer to the flashlight, we heard yet another disturbing scream. This time, however, it was coming from the direction of our camp. Now, keep in mind when we came to the area, there were no other vehicles aside from ours. Of course, that doesn't mean someone didn't come there after we got in there, though. And it's not uncommon for the homeless and party animals to go to this area. So after hearing the scream coming from the direction of our camp, we all then very quickly turned our flashlights in that direction, and we had then seen something dart across the woods. In a frantic voice, Tad then said, "Dude, what the hell was that?" I then turned my flashlight back towards the flashing beacon light to notice that it was no longer flashing. So I told my friends it was now time to get the hell out of here. We ran back to camp while gathering up all our gear, when we then heard an extremely scary laugh. We all then agreed to get what we could and just head back to the car. We did just that, and on our way back down, we had ran into the same man from the trail from earlier. He asked us if everything was okay, and how he also heard screaming in the woods. We just ignored him and continued on. I honestly don't have proof, but if I had to guess, I would say that the man in black was the one behind the screams and laughs. It could have been him, or maybe it was his friends. For all I know, it could have been a damn cult trying to scare us out of the woods. So whoever did it, mission accomplished. I tried doing some research for anything strange or sketchy going on in that area, because those screams still haunt me to this day, but I never found any other info. I can only hope that those screams weren't coming from someone actually in need of help. So this happened when I lived in Las Vegas. I was about 11 to 12 years old around 2005 to 2006. You'll need a little bit of background before I tell you what actually happened. At this time, my parents were really into drugs, meth to be specific. They would have a few different people staying with us that were homeless. Now on to what happened. I was getting out of the shower, and I noticed a random backpack hanging up in the bathroom. At the time, I didn't think too much about it. After I got dressed, I went to hang the towel next to the backpack, and that's when I noticed a strange small red light. Me being young, I didn't know what to do, so I went and showed my mom. She looked inside of it, and she then found a small video camera. My mom not wanting my dad to do anything that would land him in jail, she told one of her friends to confront the guy. My mom and dad had went to a casino to gamble, and I'd went to a friend's house while their friend was getting the guy out of the apartment. Well, a little while later, I realized I forgot something, and I went to go get it. When I got inside, the friend had the creep cornered in the shower. After everything that happened, we then realized that he had drilled a hole in the wall that went through, as well as a shelf thing that my mom had hanging in the bathroom, and the guy was using a camera to spy on us while in the bathroom. Thankfully, my parents have been sober for about 14 years now, and we live in Maine. I have a couple of other creepy stories that happened to me as well, but they aren't very long. I'll have to send those another time. But yeah, that's my strange story. I still can't believe that we had someone that lived with us that was like that. It's disgusting. The story takes place sometime in the summer of 2012, if I can remember correctly. I was about 21 years old. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I was living with my girlfriend at the time. Long story short, I got kicked to the curb over an argument. Yup, I was out on my own. So with that being said, I didn't have anywhere to go, and my family had since moved to the south because my mother was already retired, and it was significantly cheaper to live there. Being homeless in New Jersey was just way too dangerous. Come on, it's New Jersey, where the strong survive and the weak get killed. Plus, I honestly had too much pride to ask to stay with my friends or anything. So with that being said, I had a few $100s to my name, and I guess with poor judgment and a panic, I decided to get on a train into Manhattan with a little bit of stuff I had in my backpack, as well as some food, a few articles of clothing, soap, razors, deodorant, and stuff to keep clean, as well as my phone charger. While I was there, I decided it would be perfect to go to Bangor, Maine, since it was considerably cheap to take the bus there from. I took the trip, and it was actually quite amazing, and I really appreciated it, as the bus was kind of empty. There were a few passengers, but most were in the front, but there was also a girl around my age in the very back. We exchanged smiles, and we looked at one another. I remember that I had chosen to sit close to her because I figured we would get along and kill time, considering that the trip was long, and it was only the two of us back there. We did end up getting along, but she was getting off on another stop that was in another country to live with her family, and I needed to be in the city to try and find some kind of work since I was going to be homeless there getting on my feet. The plan was to either stay or save up enough money to move back into New Jersey, depending on how well it all worked out. The girl had told me the rent rates out there, and it was considerably cheaper than in New Jersey, so it was a plus. The amazing part about the trip was that she had gave me her number and her Facebook, and she ended up showing me her boobs as well as some other things that also happened on the bus that we probably definitely shouldn't have done, and if we got caught, I can only imagine, but we were in our early 20s, and we were foolish young kids. Anyway, that's honestly probably the only good thing that happened. She warned me that there was a lot of people addicted to bath salts in Bangor. Now, bath salts were technically legal around that time, but they were nothing I was going to get myself into. Apparently, it was legal meth. They sold it at the smoke shops, and they also had a label on it that said not for human consumption, but that was kind of a sneaky way for them to legally sell you it. They also had some other stuff that had many other names, such as Spice, K2, and I forgot the rest. They labeled it as incense and not for human consumption, but it was supposed to be synthetic weed. I've tried it once, and it doesn't feel like weed. It's incense, and it tastes really bad. I know weed, as I smoke a ton of it. In fact, I'm stoned right now while writing this story, so if the story sounds choppy, blame the Mary Jane. Anyway, I got off the bus, and it was late in the afternoon if I can recall correctly, and I was in for a shock. As soon as I got off the bus after saying bye to that girl, whom I don't even remember her name at all by the way. It's been years, and I've deleted Facebook and got a new number. We went our separate ways shortly after though, as that's usually what happens when you fool around with people. The first thing I can remember was the off-putting vibe I got, and I didn't have cell service at all. So I had to ask for directions downtown or the nearest place to do anything. It was a truck stop several miles outside of Bangor, not your typical Greyhound station or any other bus station. Like it was in the middle of literally nowhere, its own medium-sized field surrounded by trees in the street. The guy behind the counter looked at me like I was nuts, and he didn't say anything after I asked him where downtown or anything populated was. And I also explained that I took the bus to here from Manhattan. I know, stupid young kid. I asked him again, and he looked angry, but also very confused. He walked to the window and he pointed out to the intersection that was by the bus stop, and he said to walk several hours and good luck. It was brutal, it was hot, and I don't think Uber was a thing back then. And if it was, then I didn't know about it. And I highly doubt that it would have been available out there. Anyway, after finally getting there, I don't really recall that much, but I'll get into all the crazy and spooky things now. So the next day, after waking up in the morning, I remember going into a Dunkin' Donuts getting coffee and trying to apply for a job perhaps. I noticed that I finally had cell service. After I left to go outside and sit on the bench out there was a kid working that came up to me, and he started talking to me saying that he knew I wasn't from here and I should leave. He told me that it's very different there. I had felt the vibe way too hard the whole time I was there. He explained how there was a murder with people getting killed and burned in a car. I later read about it in an article online a few years later. They eventually caught and convicted the guys who were responsible, but I don't remember all the details, and I don't feel like looking it up. It was very real and devastating. But anyways, the guy said it was normal for stuff like that to happen there. Then he said he needed to use the restroom and he would be back. The guy came back in less than a minute with a completely different demeanor. He was jittery and he was acting a bit strange, asking for my number. I thought to myself, okay, a new buddy. Why not? No harm, right? Well, as it turns out, he was just trying to scam me because he was addicted to bath salts and he needed a fix. So I blocked him. That was the end of that. I thought to myself, well, you can't trust everyone. Plus, I think he was gay. I'm not gay at all myself, and I don't have a problem with it, and nobody should. But I think he had the wrong impression because I think he himself was using that bath salt stuff. I eventually explored the city that day, and I was looking for a place to eat. I found myself in a park, and for a city it's very spacey. Everything business-wise is very spread out. Lots of open fields and woods. You basically need a car to live there. Kind of like way back in the day when people from New York City were moving to New Jersey. Not as many businesses as you would expect neither. I was very hungry, so I had asked this elderly woman for directions because she looked and seemed normal as I was approaching her, but she wasn't normal at all. She screamed at a high-pitched voice a ton of gibberish, and it sounded very disturbing. Imagine Chewbacca from Star Wars, but at a high pitch. It was almost like that. That was the best way to explain it. What was even more disturbing was that she looked like she was actually trying to tell me, and she was pointing out directions at trees and stuff. But it didn't look like she was all that aware of what was going on, as she was making eye contact while shouting. I immediately walked away from her and kept looking back. I know mental illness when I see it. I was the one who decided to go into Bangor, Maine. I had a lot of issues at the time, but I knew that was drugs. I had just never seen anything like that to make people behave that way. Anyway, I ended up finding the McDonald's there. The people working there were actually normal, thankfully. So after that, I then went to the laundromat to clean my clothes. I had met a guy there who claimed to be from South Central. He was a nerdy looking fellow, but I could tell he was being truthful. Anyway, I chatted it up with him for a bit. He spoke about what he went through growing up and why he chose to move out to Maine. We had some major similarities. Jersey sucks, and so does LA. I've been there and many other places after this trip, and I also have other stories of shit places that I'll be sharing soon. He told me to be careful because there's a lot of armed robberies in the streets because people are hooked on bath salt. I told him about the lady that I asked directions from, and he said that she was one of the people on the bath salts. He said that's all they do there. They lose all sense of reality and scream and shout gibberish when they use it. Very scary stuff. A few days later, after looking for work and not really finding any while walking around, I then started to believe that this just isn't going to work out. Everything is spread out, and I took a trail in the woods thinking it was a shortcut to a store because I really needed to use the restroom and I didn't have to take a leak. Yeah, I had to perform the other duty. The duty, if you know what I mean. I figured if worse came to worse, I'd unfortunately have no choice but to go in the woods. But while I was deep into the woods on the trail, I saw these two girls right around my age running around, and they were popping out of nowhere while looking at me, while also laughing on the other trails in the woods. I have no idea how they got there. I'd see them in front of me at times, and then they'd disappear as I kept walking. Then I'd see them to the left of me, and so on. It was strange. I eventually ran into this random guy who asked me for a lighter. I gave it to him, and he gave it back after lighting a cigarette. We got to talking, and he told me he sells bath salts in the woods. I was really surprised because who the hell does dope deals in the woods? It's Maine. It's not the good old city streets that I'm used to. We had saw those same girls on the trail near where we're standing and talking, and they had smiled and laughed at us, then kept walking. I asked him if he knew them, and he then said, "Oh yeah, those are just girls that go around looking to suck dick for dope." Which may have been true, but they never came up to me, and it didn't seem that way. I probably would have gotten myself into that nonsense if that was the case. There was something off about them, and my dumb self decided to go look for these damn girls because I was stupid. I ended up not even seeing them again, but what did happen was that I couldn't hold it anymore, and I went and handled my business where I figured no one could see me. I didn't have anything to wipe with afterwards, so I grabbed a leaf. At least I'm keeping it real about everything. That's who I am. I'm honestly too real for most people. Anyways, I got onto the woods, and I'd made it to a Long John Silver's, I think. I think it was also a half Taco Bell as well. Anyways, I got some food there and called it a night. The next day was the worst. Well, when I went into the bathroom in the woods the night before and wiped myself with a leaf, it wasn't just any leaf. It was poison oak. Oh yeah. Can you imagine the hell? Yeah, I know. I know that's probably funny to most, but no! It felt like there was a fire in my pants and an uncontrollable itch in a place that you cannot scratch at all, especially in public. It was a nightmare. It was all down my legs and my buttocks and genitalia. I dealt with it all day until the end of the night where I just couldn't take it anymore. I tried using lotion, and it didn't really help as much as I wished. I wussied out, and I called up my lady that kicked me out, begging her to take me back after explaining all the hell that I went through. She agreed, and she even told me she missed me. The whole 9 yards. That woman truly has an amazing heart. She was a nurse in training, and she had the right stuff to treat me. She even paid for my ticket back, but the story didn't end there, of course. Because I had to make my way back to that bus station the following night. The buses only left at night. I remember not wanting to go through that creepy empty road in the dark. Now, I've been down all kinds of roads that people might think are creepy, but something about that road specifically gave me the chills. I ended up stealing a shopping cart from either a CVS or a Walgreens. One of those smaller ones that has a basket on top and one on the bottom. I threw my backpack in it, and I then rode it like you see kids running out of the store to be goofy since they're full of energy. I pushed that cart hard and fast after sipping an energy drink, and I even learned how to steer the cart perfectly while in that rush. All you have to do is lightly tap the bottom of the wheels on the back with your foot, and it actually works if you do it safely and correctly. I could have sworn that I heard creepy whistling sounds coming from the woods from something following me. It was a long faded tone. It was spooky, but nothing happened. I must have been too fast, because I got to the stop early enough to actually sneak in the shower since I stalk. I was stranded in Maine for a few days, maybe 5, and not showering, just taking sink baths. Yeah, I know, nasty. I probably should have went to the gym or YMCA, but I was way too young and dumb to think about it. I also needed the shower since I was itching. Long story short, I eventually made it back home, and while I'm no longer with that lady and haven't been for a decade, she really did help me. Anyways, that was my trip to Bangor, a place in the middle of nowhere with non-stop forests that I'll never return to. This happened a few years ago. I'm in my mid-40s now, but this happened in my late 30s. I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've had my commercial license for about 2 years when this happened. Now, I've heard many stories from other truck drivers on scary, sketchy situations, and the warning that I've always heard is don't ever park on exits at night and always lock your doors. Well, about 2 years into my driving, I truly fell in love with seeing all parts of the United States. My main route was always from the West Coast to the East Coast. One time I had a really long day at delivery, and I had to make it to a rural state in the Midwest for a pickup to take to California. I've never been very fond of weapons such as guns and huge knives, but the one thing that I did have with me was my 2-year-old Belgian Malinois. His name was Chaz. He was a crazy dog, but let me tell you, being with me since he was 8 weeks old, he sort of became my protector. I named him Chaz because it fits his character. And if you know anything about these dogs, they require a lot of exercise. On this particular trip, I had a long day of driving and I was getting exhausted. Now before this, I've always parked at truck stops, where usually lights and security roam around to make sure that no sketchy people try anything. Unfortunately, on this day, as it started to get dark, and it was almost truly midnight, I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. The next truck stop was about 50 miles away, and I just couldn't drive anymore. So I decided to take the next exit I saw and pull off the shoulder as far away from the road as to not block anyone else by any chance. I put my truck in park, and since it was pretty cool outside, I decided to turn off my truck. I figured it was late, and since not a lot of traffic, no one was going to bother me or me block them by any chance. I decided to lower the driver window just a bit to let the cool air in, then lock the truck and get into bed. Jazz was always by my feet in bed or on the floor. Since I could barely keep my eyes open, I literally just crashed into my bed. Well, not even 10 minutes into me falling asleep, I heard Jazz jump on the driver's seat and he started barking. At first, being exhausted, I just kept telling him to be quiet and to come lay down. But if you know anything about these protective dogs, they can sense something wrong very quickly. I tried to ignore him being so tired, but Jazz wouldn't let up. His barking got louder, and then he started growling. I knew then that I had to get up. As I then got up to see what he was barking at and growling at, I saw 2 large shadows on my driver's side. At first, I just thought maybe some wild animals, since it was mostly rural and flat lands. However, as I then got closer to my driver's window, through my rear mirror outside, I saw a car parked right behind me. If you know anything about big rig truck mirrors, they're huge, and you can see very clearly. I adjusted my eyes more closely because I thought I was seeing things. But Jazz was going full-blown barking, growling, and jumping from seat to seat. I jumped in my driver's seat and started the truck, and as I turned on my headlights, 2 men stood in front of my truck. As Jazz saw them, he jumped into my dashboard going crazy. I honked my horn and lowered my window, and I then yelled at them if they don't leave, I'm releasing my dog. They didn't move. Then I put my truck into gear and started moving forward, and that's when they both ran to my passenger side. I didn't wait to see, speak, or anything. I drove back into the freeway as fast as I could, and as I was looking in my rear mirrors, I saw 2 more people who were standing in the back of my trailer. Now, let me remind you that my trailer was empty then, so it's not like they had anything to steal. As my heart kept pounding, I hauled ass at 70 miles per hour to get to the truck stop that was 50 miles out. I literally didn't stop until I got there. I pulled into the gas pump area and got out to inspect my truck and trailer. Thankfully, nothing was broken or cut, but as I came back around, I saw that my diesel pump caps were both off. I have 2 diesel pumps, one on each side. I put the caps back on and double-checked everything. As a truck driver, the common issue is stealing the diesel while you sleep, then cutting the airlines and stealing merchandise. As I got back into my truck and looked for parking, I started to calm down a bit. Jazz by then calmed down too. My heart finally stopped pounding. I didn't turn off my truck that whole night, and I remember that I had a really hard time falling asleep, but I did eventually and continued on my road. And as for many wondering if I called the police, no, because I didn't see a license plate or what kind of car, and by then I'm sure those 4 people scattered from there very quickly. I'll always be grateful to my Belgian Malinois, who sadly passed away last year. Jazzy Boy really kept me safe all the time. From then on, I learned to appreciate the protection of my dogs a lot more. It's been a while since my scary incident. I've also heard many others that are way worse. Still to this day, I drive, and now I own my own truck and trailer. But instead of 1 dog, now I have 2 German Shepherds with me. Be safe out there. As for alone female drivers, a weapon is good to have, but nothing beats having a protective dog inside that truck with you. I was always rather sheltered growing up. I know that my parents wanted me to stay on the straight and narrow, so they maybe went overboard. But through basketball and other sports, I was actually able to have somewhat of a life. Fast forward to now, and I'm 35. I never thought I was going to make it past 34 after this event. One of the most traumatic experiences for me to understand that life can end in the blink of an eye. On an absolutely beautiful night, me and the girl that I was talking to, who we're gonna call her CK, decided that we wanted to embark on a lovely evening night out with each other. So we went to a hookah lounge. It was supposed to be one of her friends with us, but her friend had backed out at the last minute, which is great because, you know, alone time. So we went to the hookah lounge and had a really great time. We sat down, and I wanted to say that it took about an hour and a half before we got our drinks. However, we were really enjoying the vibe of each other, and we didn't even really notice the drinks that hadn't come. So to go ahead and get down to the night's event, everything was going wonderful, and the DJ was making a great selection of music, catering to both men and the women. I really had good vibes going, and I felt like the day was going amazing. She was also having an amazing time. Then it happened. In the background, all we hear is a man that then said,
"Get the fuck away from me! Come outside and I'm gonna fucking pop you! Fuck around and I'll pop you!"
As this is going on, the first thing in my mind is telling me to leave this establishment. But CK was looking so beautiful, and I really wanted to soak up all this time that we had, because we don't spend much time together. So I actually decided against leaving, and I stayed. Why, oh why did I do that? I don't even know myself. Well, within about the next 15 minutes later, our drinks are there. Great. We're now vibing, and we're just staying there chilling, when we then hear loud pops. Yep, you guessed it. Gunshots. Not just any gunshots though. We actually heard machine gunshots going off outside of the lounge. While inside the club, I had grabbed CK and hid under the table. Everyone was under a table in the lounge by the minute they heard the gunshots. As you can all imagine, I wanted to get the fuck out of this place. 20 minutes had passed by. I thought we may just want to make a break for it. However, the security officer was making sure that everybody stayed inside. But you know, forget that, and we went outside. Both me and CK went to my car and we began to drive off. But as we were driving off, everybody around us is telling us to stop. So I rolled down my window, then looked down. One of the bullets had actually went through my fuel pump, so another spark would have caused my entire car to explode right there. The main priority was getting away from the stray bullets, however. Let's just get out of here and worry about that last part later. So we then drove to the first open parking lot. It was a local McDonald's that was right next to the hookah lounge site. Come to find out, one of the individuals, a young lady, died that night in the gunfire. It wasn't intentional, but it was a stray bullet. My deepest condolences go out to that family of that young woman who lost her life, and for the idiot who wanted to shoot at a public area where someone's mother, father, sister, and brothers are. I'm really glad you were caught. Unfortunately though, that brilliant young woman doesn't get to get her life back. I don't think I'll be going back to hookah lounges for a long time. So this happened around last year on Valentine's Day. It was a pretty low-key day for my family. For some context to make more sense of the story, my town is a very small town, like less than about 3,000 people. So you can imagine that the community is tight-knit, and it's an everyone knows everyone type of deal. Everyone will stay anonymous because what happened is big news, and you could easily find it if I told you. Okay, so enough background info. On this Valentine's Day, my mom had to work at the local gas station, which is in the middle of town. Valentine's Day was on a weekend as well, I believe. I think it was a Friday. I gave my mom her Valentine's Day present in the morning. It wasn't anything special, just some chocolates. She went to work afterwards, and the day just went on like normal, until she got home. It was late at night. I want to say around 9 or 10 p.m. My mom usually works late at night at the store, so it wasn't that odd. Well, we all got ready for bed and said our goodnights to mom, when all of a sudden, my mom saw something that scared her. She ran downstairs and seemed to be in a frenzy. My mom isn't usually like this, so we got worried. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "The store's on fire." Now, my mom wasn't even home for an hour after she got out of the store, but she ran out, got in her car, and drove down there, then alerting the firefighters. Then my mom's boyfriend went down afterwards, not long after her. My boyfriend and I were in complete and utter shock. After that, it was just a total fiasco. Basically, everyone standing out on their porches and looking out on the fire while the firefighters were taking out the fire. After this, mom of course lost her job, and she was completely shaken up by this. She was crying. I felt so bad for her. There were also some assholes who even blamed her for the fire after it happened. Luckily though, there were few and far between. The firefighters concluded what had started the fire was a faulty electrical wire in the bathroom. This fire could have been prevented by getting a surge protector. My mom was on the side of the store owner for some reason, and I didn't really understand it. All I think about is the what ifs. The what if she had stayed there just a little longer? What if the fire had took her with it? Could she have been hurt or worse? My mom staying later wouldn't have been suspected by us since she stayed late around 11 to 12 a.m. And the fact that this fire was totally preventable really made me pissed off at the owner. She didn't pay for any of the damages that mom and other employees have had since they weren't employed anymore. My mom is doing much better now, and she's employed somewhere else. But I still remember the terrified and utter panicked look that she had on her face when she realized that the store was on fire. It's something that I'll never forget. The story took place on the way to an ATM at about 11 p.m. in East LA. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I was living with a family member. Their name was M, and it was after my ex and I broke up just a couple of months prior. I was totally broke, $12K in debt, and in the negatives with my bank. I was still talking to him, really hoping that he'd grow some balls and start using his money towards paying it off. He had maxed out all of my credit cards and drained my bank account while living with them. So when I said I was broke, I mean dirt broke. One of the conditions of my relationship I had to continue to potentially get that money back was sharing my 24/7 location, as well as picking up his calls immediately and having random screen recorded calls to check my messages, call history, as well as my browser activity just to make sure I wasn't seeing anybody new. Least to say, I was fairly depressed. One night we had an argument over the phone. I saw a $300 charge to my credit card for a strip club, drinks, and more. He actually had the audacity to accuse me of hooking up because my location history was different between Google Maps and Apple. So to blow off steam, I left my phone at home. I told him I would be out for about an hour or two. I then packed my knife and started walking. I had actually scrapped up a couple of $100 that day, just enough to get out of the negatives. So I made the 20-minute walk to the ATM that was nearby. However, for a perspective of where I was living, I had to step over or walk around homeless folks from my house to the ATM. A little nerve-wracking since most of the streetlights were out, but they were usually harmless and just passed out. However, this had changed once I got to the crosswalk in front of the ATM. There was one homeless dude completely cracked out standing in my way. Actually made eye contact, and when I moved left, he moved left, and when I moved right, he moved right. Not once breaking eye contact. His eyes looked so manic, and a fucking smile crept out of one of the corners of his mouth. When I backtracked, he took a few steps forward. My heart fell into the pit of my stomach. So, knowing I had a 20-minute walk back with nobody around to see this, I decided the best chance of getting out of this was to hold my ground. I clutched my knife visibly and gave him the death stare, not breaking eye contact all the way towards the ATM, treading very slowly to avoid sudden movements, ready to stab if necessary. When I reached his side of the crosswalk, we were standing about 4 feet apart from each other, not breaking eye contact and not moving. He took a couple of steps towards me twice, and I revealed the handle of my knife both times, which had then caused him to go back and forth, like he was actually debating if he actually wanted to lunge. Realistically, this only continued for about 30 seconds, but it felt like we were the only two people on that block, and time had stopped or something. To my surprise, a small group of teenagers came out of the liquor store next door, and they walked right past us and crossed the crosswalk, which had distracted the guy enough to forget all about my existence. He started following them though, and he stood in the crosswalk for a solid minute looking up at the sky, then suddenly sprinted down the hill to the left. After another 5 minutes had passed, he was nowhere to be seen. So I did what I came to do, deposited the cash, which in and of itself made me feel safer. I then went to the liquor store for a breather and a cool bev, and I then made the trek back to my house no problem. I hadn't been out later than I said, so I chose to keep to myself. I showered, went to bed, and started tomorrow like yesterday never even happened. I saw that crackhead once or twice more while living there, but I never made the mistake of making eye contact again. My name is Nerdy, and I'm a female who was born in the Copper City in the New York State. I was 12 years old and in 5th grade. I started school at 6 years old. I was then held back in 2nd grade, hence why I was behind in grades at my age. I walked the same route every day to school, which was only about 3 blocks away and wasn't in a secluded area or private in any way at all. It was typically safe, and I never felt afraid until this fateful day. I was going to school, and I had saw a car on my route in front of an older couple's house just around the corner from my house. It was a light tan small car. The guy was brunette with green eyes, and he had a creepy smile on his face full of unkempt stubble. The guy was wearing a leather jacket, and the interior of his car was maroon. I paid attention but just kept walking to school. Forgot about it before long, until the following morning. And this time when I saw him, he called out to me to come to his window. This caused me to clutch my chest before I glared at him, then sang, "Ew, hell no," and then went along to school. The same thing happened the next day, and I ignored him this time, but stayed aware of my surroundings, as I noticed he was using a camera or something to snap pictures and videos of me. I then called him a pervert, and then ran to school. That day though, when I came back that same way to head home, he was in the same spot again, just watching me and catcalling me like a dirty old man, as he had to have been around my parents' age or even older. When I got home, I went right to my room, right to bed, and then buried my head into my pillows, crying out in mental agony and complete stress. That's when I then heard a truck pull in the driveway. I run to the door and I greet my father with a tight hug. This had worried him because we weren't particularly very physically affectionate with one another. My father pulled me to his office and he sat me in his work chair, asking me what was going on with me. Since I had been off for days now, that was when I told my dad everything, every detail I possibly could. The best part? The following morning, my father left for work earlier than usual, and I thought nothing of it. But I went along my way, and I was going to school in fear of that same man kidnapping or hurting me in some way. But when I came by his car, which was on the side of the road I usually walked on, he would be facing my direction like he was going to open the door really fast, but I didn't see him. So I walked close to the car for the first time. He was slumped over in his car, sitting in the driver's seat, with his head in the passenger in a small pool of blood, and he looked to have had a broken nose. I was shocked, but I just walked to school like nothing had happened. When I got home later that night, I was blissful. The guy wasn't anywhere in sight on my way home. Then when my father got home, I had asked him how his day was, when I noticed his hand had bruised cut knuckles. So I decided to ask him about what that was about. That was when my father told me that he went down my path to school to make sure the guy wouldn't bother me ever again. To his surprise, the guy was right around the corner, and this instantly angered him. So he quickly devised a plan and walked by the car, but as he got to the driver's window, he then said, "Hey bro, do you got a lighter? I could use a quick light." Well, the pervert said yes, and he reached over to grab it out of the cubby under the radio. When he turned back to face my father to give him the lighter, my father then told him to stay the hell away from me and my route to school, and if he didn't, he would make him vanish with no remorse. My father is very psychotic and very angry. Plus, he's Italian and German, so he's very quick angered. That's when my dad then punched the guy one good punch right in the nose cheek area just under the eye, which quite frankly knocked the guy the fuck out. Then he walked to his truck and went off to work. I was truly grateful for that, and I hugged my dad tightly. He really was my hero that day. Have a great day or great night, everyone, and be safe out there. And as Southern Cannibal says, stay hungry. This story will probably be confusing to follow, so to make it a little easier, I'll give some background info. I'm a 15-year-old female and I have 6 siblings. 3 brothers and 3 sisters. All of them are older than me except for my little brother. Only 2 will actually be relevant in this story. So my little brother, my older sister, and I have been homeschooled almost all of our lives due to my dad's work and how much he has to travel for it. I went back to public school after about 4 years of being homeschooled when I was in 6th grade. My younger brother was in 5th grade, and my older sister was in 8th grade at this time. Not to brag or float my own boat, but I've always been on the prettier side. so I've had a lot of boys ask me out ever since I started public school. I always had fun with this, and like most people, really enjoyed being called pretty. A couple of months after I joined public school again, this one boy got my older sister's number. We had shared a phone at the time, so we had the same number, and I thought that she had started dating him, but I was soon proven wrong. This boy, who I'll call DS for privacy reasons, was very nice to me. He was a grade above me and a grade below my sister. DS would always try to talk to me in the hallways whenever I was walking to different classes or when we were at recess, and I would never really say anything back because I don't feel comfortable around most boys due to past experiences with them, plus my lack of social skills at the time. Fast forward about a week or two, DS kept talking to me and kind of cut off my sister, and I then kept talking to him for the rest of the school year. Only a quarter, which is a couple of months. Well, he started acting super protective, and he would also text me at all hours of the day, and I got super annoyed with him. So once summer rolled around, I completely cut him off. He would spam text me or spam call me, and wouldn't stop for a while. So I ended up blocking his number. Keep in mind that my sister and I still shared a phone at this time. Anyways, school rolled back around. I was in the 7th grade now, and my sister no longer attended the same school as me since she was now a high schooler. DS was an 8th grader, and I still attended the same school as I did before, and when the first day of school came, he then ran up to me and he asked why I didn't talk to him all throughout the summer. I just walked past him, and his face got all red, and he started cussing me out and calling me a bitch, then saying that he hopes I rot in hell. Mind you, I was only like 12 years old at the time, and he was 14. He started to harass me in the hallways and would say that he was going to kill me, or he would push me against my locker. I've always been a smaller person. When I was in 7th grade, I was 5 foot and 85 pounds. I ignored his behavior until he then started bullying my younger brother. Once he started bullying my brother for problems related to me, I was over it. So whenever I saw him picking on my brother, I would go up to him and push him out of the way, or I would start arguing with him, and he would always end up walking towards me threateningly. And when I would stand my ground, he would back off. Eventually, I talked to a teacher about it, and they had a talk with him, and he ended up leaving me alone for a while, until the last quarter of my 7th grade year. My sister got her own phone now, and she got the one that we all used to share. My brother and I got a new one. Somehow DS got the new number and started sending me threatening texts, so I blocked him again. He kept making new numbers somehow and just kept texting me the most threatening things. For example, he said he was going to break into my house and cut my head off, then leave my bloody body on the lawn for my mom to see it. None of these threats even fazed me since I had already had similar experiences with boys when I was in kindergarten to 2nd grade. Fast forward to the summer before my 8th grade year. I thought DS was going to leave me alone for good now. My mom was in a different city, and my siblings were asleep. I was taking a shower, and it was 7 in the morning. DS broke into my house, and he opened our front door. We used to leave our door unlocked most of the time because we live in a very small country town where pretty much everyone knows everyone, and there's literally never any break-ins. Once he opened the front door, our guard dog bit him, and when I got out of the shower, the front door was still wide open. I looked at our security footage, and I wasn't that shocked to say the least. A couple of weeks later, I had a friend request on Snapchat from a person I'm good friends with, so I accepted it. I really wish that I didn't. It was DS. DS had sent me rape threats and said he was going to kidnap me and have my kids even if I didn't like it. I immediately blocked him. I was 13 at this time. Not even a month later, I woke up to someone trying to open our front door. I went to see who it was, and of course, it was DS. I was still half asleep at this point, and I was startled. So I let our dog out of his cage, but DS had already left. DS continued making Snapchat accounts, and I just stopped accepting friend requests from everyone because I just didn't trust any of them. The last friend request I accepted was DS telling me that I better start listening to him, since he had knives and that he could make me do whatever he wanted. I told him to fuck off and leave me and my family alone. He continued this behavior throughout my 8th grade year, and my mom reported him several times. Now I still attend school with DS, but he doesn't come near me. The cops told him if he ever tried to pull that crap again, he would be sent to a reform school. I haven't had trouble with him for a while, though whenever he passes me in the hallways, he always makes sure to come extra close, and it makes me really uncomfortable and sometimes scared. Anyways, to any woman or male with similar experiences, I'm so sorry. I know it's really scary, but it will get better if you talk to someone. I'm really happy I told my mom. I mean, who the hell knows what else he would have done if I hadn't. These stories are a few months apart, so I'll start off with the first incident that we had. A little backstory. When we found out we were pregnant with our son, we decided to move to an old farmhouse. At the time, our oldest was 5 going on 6, and I was about 7 months pregnant. We also have 2 very large dogs, a Shepherd Rottweiler cross and a Dogo Argentino. At the time of this story, we had lived in the house for 3 months, and we had a few unsettling things said to us from neighbors about the man who lived here before us. We were told, yeah, Kevin was very odd, or Kevin was a creep. He was a total nutcase. He was completely insane. My fiance thought nothing about this, but the way they said these things left me feeling very uneasy. My fiance works early in the morning and would leave around 4:30 to 5 a.m., and I would stay asleep until our oldest woke up, or my alarm went off at 7 to get him ready for school. On this particular morning, my fiance had left, and both dogs were in bed upstairs with our oldest son. Our bedroom was off the living room that was connected to the dining room. Off the dining room was a door that led to our side porch. We had never used that door though. We always just went through the kitchen door that led to the garage. I clearly heard my fiance leave through the garage. His big work boots stomping around the house was enough to keep anyone awake. So after he left, I settled back into bed. About 10 minutes after hearing him pull out of the driveway, I heard the side porch door open and someone walking around in what sounded to be cowboy boots. I listened for about a minute as the steps walked around our dining room table to the bathroom and then the kitchen, until I got a text from my fiance wishing me a good day. I then text back, "Are you not home still?" Assuming that he forgot his phone or wallet, or maybe he put on his cowboy boots instead of his work boots. Then he replied, "No, I just got to the job site now." I immediately called him and then said softly into the phone, "Honey, there's someone in the house." He then replied back with, "Stay put, I'm on my way." At that point, I had heard footsteps coming to the living room across from our bedroom. I had yelled out hello? And I heard swift footsteps back into the dining room, and then the door slammed shut. My fiance got home and we could see clear footprints leading out to the road. About a few months later, my newborn and now 6-year-old son and I were home alone while their dad was out having a guys' night. We were sitting in the living room watching a movie when I had heard the side door open again. This time our dogs ran for the door, growling and barking within seconds, and I heard a man start screaming, "Ouch! Fuck!" and then slammed the door. My Dogo had a piece of ripped fabric in his mouth and a really guilty look on his face. I told him good boy, and I opened the door to see if I could see who was there. As I did, They both sprinted outside to the tree line. I then saw a truck speed off with them following quickly behind. I immediately heard the neighbor Ron across the road then screaming, "That was Kevin! Are you guys okay?" I told him yes we are, thanks to the dogs, but that I'm terrified now to be home alone with the boys, unable to get a hold of my fiance. Ron came over and sat with me while I put the boys to bed, but then we sat around drinking some coffee until I worked up the nerve to ask what happened to make everyone around here hate Kevin so much. Ron then told me they do a pig roast every summer, and they always invite all of the neighbors. That one year Kevin showed up and he was being really creepy towards one of the younger girls who was there, and that when he had pulled him aside and called him out on it, Kevin grabbed a knife and tried to stab him, and it ended in a huge altercation between Kevin, Ron, and a few other men. He said that every time he would go to get his meal, Kevin would just sit across the road staring him down with what he said was the creepiest look he had ever seen. My fiance texted me letting me know he would be home in about 5 minutes, and when he got home, Ron had pulled him aside and spoke to him about Kevin, and also how Ron feels that he's very dangerous and mentally unstable. This really shocked my fiance, so the very next day he went out and bought new locks for the house and then changed every last one, even the garage door. All was well until my son was about 3 months old. My fiance was away for work this week, and I had told Ron that it would just be me and the boys home all week, so to please keep an eye out for crazy Kevin for me. We chuckled a bit, and he told me that his guns were always loaded and sitting by the door for coyotes or Kevin. So on this night, I had gotten home from taking the boys out for dinner, and I had just put my oldest son to bed and was rocking my youngest while on the phone with my dad. I then heard the garage door open, then realizing, shit, I must have not locked it. Now, from the garage, there were 2 sets of doors that you'd have to go through to get into the house. Now, the first one, if you open it and turn to your left, it leads you 3 steps to the kitchen door that is just glass paneling, or you go straight ahead and then the stairs lead you down to the basement. Well, I then heard someone running down into the basement. It was loud enough that my dad had heard it through the phone, so I quickly hung up and then called Ron, but got no answer. I then called the cops and they told me to barricade the glass door until they arrived. I did, and we could actually hear things moving around in the basement. Well, after a few minutes, I had heard footsteps coming back up from the basement, and the kitchen door handle started wiggling. I realized all I had was dog mace, that all of our guns were in the safe in the garage where this creep was. Right at that moment, I had heard someone pulling into the gravel driveway, and within a second, the banging of someone sprinting up the basement stairs. I was then greeted by an officer knocking on the kitchen door announcing themselves. He said that he would check the basement. I waited a few minutes until he came back up telling me to come check out what he had found. When I got down there, I found out there was a hidden room underneath my staircase with a whole bunch of boxes of paperwork and pictures, but not normal family pictures. There were pictures of the neighbors through their windows of their houses. I thought for sure I was going to be sick. Thankfully, there were none of me or our children, but there were pictures of multiple other children from our street. I explained that we had only lived here under a year, and that we had moved in and just threw our things in we needed to store down there, and we never really checked it out thoroughly. Ron saw the lights and came over, and was able to answer most of the officer's questions regarding Kevin. Kevin was arrested, but I never called to find out the outcome. But it's been about 5 months since the last incident, and nothing else has happened. And I'm really hoping nothing else ever happens again. So Kevin, if you or anyone you know is listening to this, please, I beg of you, don't ever set foot on our property again. It's not yours anymore. This happened about 4 years ago when I was 14 years old in February of 2018. For some context, my grandmother had passed away in 2016. My aunt and uncle also had a house on the same piece of land. They had decided to give my youngest cousin my grandmother's old house. My cousin also has a daughter. We'll call her A for obvious reasons. Anyways, on to the story. I woke up in the middle of the night to something hitting the window. I just shrugged it off, thinking it was just a tree branch, and just tried to go back to sleep. About 30 seconds later, I heard it again, and I decided to look out the window when I saw a guy holding 3 rocks and a knife. I started to see a smile forming on his face, and it wasn't a happy smile. It was a scary smile. I saw him walk up to the basement door, open it, and walk right in. I guess my cousin had forgot to lock it. I then unplugged my phone to call the police. I ran into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife I could, ran to A's room and got her out of bed, then ran to my cousin's room to wake him up. He actually took me very seriously, and then ran into the kitchen to go grab the second biggest knife. At this point, A was asking what was going on. Keep in mind, she was only 5 years old then, and I didn't say anything to her. My cousin then ushered us to the back corner of his closet. It's a really big closet. He then stood at the door waiting for the man to do whatever he was planning. I had got A hidden behind a rack of shirts, and I stood in the middle of the closet. We then heard the man coming up the stairs. I walked to where A was, and I put my hand over her mouth. We then heard him walk into my cousin's room. He tried to open the closet door, but my cousin was smart enough to lock it. The man then pounded on the closet door and then screaming like an insane person. My cousin then opened the door and then stabbed the man in the shoulder. I then picked up A, and I then ran with all of my might to my aunt and uncle's house, which was about 500 feet away. I rang the doorbell like 20 times before my aunt finally answered. I then explained to them what happened. The police had finally arrived at this point. The man and my cousin were still having a knife battle, but the police had managed to arrest the man. Strangely, they had explained to us how the man had apparently escaped the area's mental facility. He was promptly put back in there, but I still don't know how the hell he got his hands on a knife. This event has made me super paranoid. I ended up having to go to therapy over it. I forgot to also mention that my cousin was 23 at the time. He definitely did his best to protect A and I, and I'm so grateful for that. And to that man, mental illness or not, I hope you rot in hell for what you did. This was years ago, perhaps when I was around 6 or 7. For reference, at the time, I was probably the height of a toddler. I was a very small boy for my age, not gonna lie. I grew up in a pretty crappy neighborhood and family. My parents were often on stuff, and I was left to care for my younger sister. I had an older sister, but she was often on stuff as well. I would generally hang out alone outside to get air, or go to the church around 1 to 2 a.m. The church was approximately around 10 to 20 minutes away from our place. To get there, you had to walk an isolated path through some wooded area. My parents were never really the ones to care to what we did. This particular night, my sister had invited some friends over, insisting they wanted to hang out with me to show them the playground by the church. I was really happy to just see some guys around, maybe to get to know them. My brother wasn't born at this time. It was all girls at the time, so this is why I was like this. I of course said yes and quickly got ready. They had bikes and they made absolutely sure to stay ahead of me, so I had to run to keep up, shouting for them to slow down. I got to the park as they were just getting off their bikes, shouting my name. I guess I'll use a nickname to protect my identity. "Come on, Mooka, show us around." To me, they seemed genuinely excited. I was overjoyed that my sister actually wanted to hang out with me for once. We never really had a good relationship, as she often instigated the beatings I would get. I had just gotten close to them when they were all simultaneously jumping back on their bikes, then throwing profanities at me. I screamed, tears already filling my eyes. I was really disappointed and let down, just standing there as I saw their figures get smaller. I eventually just sat in the playground side, curling my legs to my chest and putting my head on my knees, praying to God they would come back. Time passed by and my legs had started to hurt, so I started to walk around. The park was pretty small, 3 swings, a slide, monkey bars, and a pole holding the American flag. I walked and head down to the pole, circling around it, trying to see how high I could count to pass time, when suddenly, I heard a loud screech. I don't know where it came from, but my vision then abruptly gave out. I honestly don't know if it was anxiety, but I definitely hit the floor very hard. I could only hear footsteps approaching, and an older man's voice ripped through the ringing in my ears. I later found out I had heart issues, just to clear any suspicion of over-exaggeration. Who could leave a little boy alone so late? I wasn't completely out, not like I had fainted, so I could pick up on his tone. It was mixed with a smirk, if you get what I mean. Sarcastic concern and just all in all a creepy vibe. I sat on the gravel surrounding the pole as the man got closer. He was pretty old, had a long white/gray beard, white hair, and dressed like a drunken biker, and skin that could stretch to cover a mountain. I don't remember what happened once he reached me, but I do remember suddenly waking up in his car and my throat being dry as hell. My body was weak, and my eyesight was even more out than before. I truly thought that this was the last day I would ever see my family. I shook even harder at the thought of not being able to become a father to break the cycle. I just laid there, unable to hold my own body up anymore. He slowly walked to his door when I then heard yelling, a scattering of feet, and my sister's voice. She had came back. "What the hell?" I heard one guy shout. My sister then quickly ran to my side as 2 of her friends chased the guy through the path that comes to the church. I could hear the concern in her voice as she grabbed me, holding me to her chest. She gripped me so tight that I thought I would pass out then and there, from shock or lack of air, who knows. I later found out at age 13 that the reason she came back as such great timing was, as she states, "We were gonna leave you there all night long just as a prank, but when we were barely halfway across the foundation, I heard a blood-curdling scream. That's not what got me. I thought you were just being a baby. But then it suddenly cut off. It was the silence. The deafening silence is what got my adrenaline going. Ever since that day, I've never felt comfortable to be left alone by any church, park, or anywhere dark. Things really could have turned out very bad if my sister hadn't shoved her hate towards me down her throat and listened to her gut. I'm so grateful to this day, and our relationship couldn't be better. I live in the beautiful countryside of Suffolk, England. When I finally got the money together to buy my first car, there was nothing I loved doing more than getting back from college and chucking my dog in the back seats and looking for a new route to walk. She was a black and white lurcher named Doobie. Yes, my sister's stoner boyfriend named her this. She was an awesome dog who loved coming on new adventures. Honestly, I don't know who enjoyed them more, me or her. On this particular evening, my best friend and neighbor had asked if I could pick him up from his job as a car valeter in a little old town called Wickham Market. Like most of the small old market towns around here, it's mostly made up of buildings that are older than the US itself. So I'm driving through the backcountry roads looking for somewhere nearby with a footpath or a trail to take the dog up, when I just spot a little parking bay next to a footpath sign, half covered by overgrown bushes. So I parked up and let Doobie out. She had her collar on, and although I slung it around my neck just in case, I never bothered with putting her leash on as she walked a hill, as it was very rare to come across other walkers around here. Most of these trails take you straight onto open crop fields, so I was a little surprised to find that we were on a long windy mud path through a small but dense wooded area. In fact, it has been incredibly bright and sunny, but the trees had such thick canopies that it felt dark and cold in the shade of them. As we made our way along, the cold feeling started to make me feel like all the hairs on my body were now standing up. Like maybe it was more than just the cool shade making me feel off. For one thing, my dog would have usually started to venture off by now, never straying too far, but certainly exploring the world as she went. But this time she stayed glued to my side. I don't know if she sensed something herself or she was picking up on my growing unease. I started to pick up my pace, now seeing the light at the end of the wooded tunnel very soon. I couldn't put my finger on it. I felt like all my instincts were on fire, like I was about to have some sort of panic attack if I didn't leave that place right now. Unseen eyes followed me as we exited onto the sunny edge of a field. It's not like we have any predators big enough to attack a human here or anything, so why did I feel like that? I stopped to light a cigarette and check my phone. It was already getting late. That path had taken us a while to get down, and as I looked around, a sinking feeling then struck me. The next trail sign I could see was way off and still heading away from my car. I realized then I'd have to go back the way we had just come. I finished my cigarette, and I decided to put the dog on her leash to walk back. It just felt safer for some reason. As we entered the long dark path again, I told myself I was being stupid. The dog probably got spooked and picked up on that. That's all. Just as we approached the part where I'd felt so afraid minutes earlier, something through the trees caught my eye. It was a plaque. It read, "The remains of Pottsford Gibbet, last known hanging April 14th, 1699, Jonah Snell." For those of you who don't know, a gibbet was used to hang and display corpses, sometimes for months or even years. I could see the post standing there further in the undergrowth. We practically sprinted back to the car after that. I know it's a bit anticlimactic, but I've grown up surrounded by stuff like this before in England, but never before have I ever felt like that. It was like something deep inside of me sensed death and danger nearby. So obviously when I got home, I decided to look it up on Google. Yes, this was before internet phones. So this is the story of Jonah Snell, the last person executed at the Pottsford Gibbet. On February 10th, 1698, a chilling murder took place at Letheringham Watermill, which left two men dead, a father and son, both who shared the name John Bullard. The men had been brutally attacked by an axe-wielding maniac before then being hogtied to a beam in the mill, where their bodies were hung upside down until they were discovered. No one knows if they were dead or alive as they were hoisted into the air, their blood spilling into the ground. Shortly afterwards, a man was found wandering around in the area clutching a dripping axe, his clothes red with blood. Jonah Snell was arrested and appeared at West Wickham Sessions Court, where he was then found guilty of cold-blooded murder of the men who had been working at the mill when their servant then attacked them. He offered no defense. Snell was then hung at Pottsford Wood on April 14th, 1699, his corpse displayed in an iron cage gibbet in the wood as a warning. His remains moldered in the cage until 1740, until the structure was lowered and what was left of Snail was then buried nearby. The more and more I read, the more I'm convinced myself that I really was in the presence of something truly evil that day, because my story is just one of so many where people have experienced something otherworldly there. If you can be bothered, have a read on it yourself. It's creepy stuff. I only live a short drive away from that place now, and I've actually been back there a couple of other times on Halloween with a bunch of people for a laugh, but I've never had those eerie feelings again, and I'm really glad for that. For the sake of this story, my name will be David, and the story started over a decade ago. I've always been kind of an awkward person, and for the most part, I would just talk to people online. One girl ended up being rather interesting to me, and we started talking. Her name being Brooklyn, but for whatever reason, she wanted to be called Skylar. The two of us hit it off, and we ended up dating online for a while. I forgot to add, but this is important to the story, and this all occurred in North Carolina. Anyways, she didn't really live that far away from me, and I had visited her a few times. Her family seemed a bit odd, but I was an awkward teenager, so I shrugged it off. Brooklyn and her siblings were also homeschooled, and her parents were fairly strict, but they were always cordial to me the few times that I'd met them. Well, one day the fair was in town, and we had made plans to go together. So once my mom had driven me there, I got a text with her saying she couldn't go. I wasn't too thrilled about it, but I thought whatever. I guess that her parents changed their minds. Well, it wasn't too much later that she ended up breaking up with me seemingly out of nowhere. I took it pretty hard, but in the end, all I could really do was just move on with my life. Well, fast forward a few years, and I was talking to my mom while the news was on, and I got distracted when I then saw a story pop up. As cliche as it sounds, my blood ran cold. The girl on the screen seemed so familiar. It took a bit to process what it was saying. I can't really remember if it was showing her as missing or deceased at the time, but that little girl on the screen was Brooklyn's sister. The news covering the story eventually told what happened. She was reported missing in 2011, the very same year I was dating her sister. The full story eventually came to light, and what I heard that day, and any time I've read about the case, nearly makes me vomit. Her adoptive parents were being charged for, I believe, fraud as well as murder. The things that poor girl went through makes me absolutely fucking sick. She was beaten, locked in closets, forced to go without food, or even just have to eat canned dog food. It came to light that on top of all of the abuse, they ended up killing and burying her in South Carolina. Her adoptive brother eventually spoke up, and he admitted the siblings abused her as well at times. This story may sound made up, and you're honestly welcome to not believe it. It is, however, 100% true, and even to this day, I really wish I could have done something to help her. I literally shook hands with the people that could do something so cruel to someone, and I never even knew. If you want to read more about it yourself, just so you know it's true, just Google Erica Parsons. This happened on a random Friday night during my senior year of high school, which started out like so many before it. I had driven my friend, who we'll refer to as Dan, to his boyfriend's apartment. Let's call him Ned. And I did this so the three of us could all hang out. Sometimes there would be other friends in the car with us as well. Sometimes there would be others in Ned's apartment waiting for us to arrive. Most of the time we would get together to play video games, watch movies, eat pizza, drink, and smoke. But this night was different because it was just the three of us, Dan, Ned, and I. I should mention here that I'm a woman, and I was 18 years old at the time. The three of us were just going to hang out rather than party. So when Dan and I arrived, Ned greeted us with no booze and no weed. We started a movie, and roughly about 30 minutes into it, Ned received a text message from a buddy of his. Apparently this buddy had been at the bar with other friends, and they had gotten so rowdy that they were kicked out. So they asked if they could crash at Ned's place. Apparently not concerned about drinking and driving. Ned didn't seem to mind either, because he told his buddy that it was fine. After Ned then casually told us that his drunk friends were too drunk for the bar and they'd be at his place soon, we went back to the movie, thinking very little of it at the time. A few minutes later, we heard a loud crashing sound as 5 guys came barreling through the apartment's main door. No one even had to push the buzzer to be let in. Ned could tell that they had arrived based on how outrageously loud they were being when they got there. So he opened his apartment door and guided the drunken group up the stairs and into his apartment. Ned made introductions for us, telling his drunken friends Dan's name and my name. Being the only girl present with a bunch of tall college-age drunken guys was a little intimidating, but I put on my best smile anyway. It didn't take the guys long to head into the kitchen and ransack Ned's place for food. The guys had decided to make some pizza, but Ned felt the need to supervise since they were all so wasted. Dan stayed with me in the living room, and some other drunken guys stayed behind too to check out Ned's computer. He then encouraged me to come over to help him use the computer. I thought that he must have been joking, but I walked over to help him. Well, once I bent over the desk, he pulled me onto his lap. My face turned red, and I was very visibly uncomfortable, trying to pull myself away almost immediately, but the drunken guy kept laughing like it was a joke.
"Hey, lighten up,"
he told me.
"I just want you to sit down with me for a minute. Can't you do that?"
He asked in a slurred voice, the putrid smell of alcohol wafting heavily off his breath. I absolutely cringed at the smell, and again pulled away. "That's okay, I'm good," I tried to say, but this only seemed to make him more insistent. Suddenly he grabbed my wrist and then held me down with one arm around my waist. I was basically trapped. I turned to look at Dan, my friend of 3 years, and I saw him duck into the kitchen, pretending he didn't see what just happened.
"Maybe you like to be held down,"
the drunk guy insisted.
"I can hold you down. I'm pretty good at that."
Now he was leaning into my neck and sloppily kissing on my skin. I felt sick as I recoiled away, using my free hand to push his chest away from me. "No, I don't!" I yelled, this time hoping to get the attention of one of the other guys in the apartment.
"Then you're just a fucking tease,"
the drunk guy shouted at me, still gripping my wrist so hard that it was now turning red.
"I should take you into the bedroom and show you a thing or two,"
he mumbled while I continued to protest. I just kept telling him to stop and let me go. Eventually he stood up from the chair and tugged me toward the bedroom. I tried to yank myself free, but he was behind me, and he moved his arm from around my waist to now wrap it around my chest, groping me in the process. I was visibly shaken at this point, tears starting to prick my eyes. I didn't really know how to get myself free. I couldn't understand why my friend Dan didn't do anything to help me. Finally, Ned noticed something was amiss. He came over, pushed the drunk guy, and then told the others, "Yeah, you better get your fucking friend." The group of guys clumsily came over, and then pushed the guy off of me until I was finally freed. I just found a place to hide, shaking and crying until they all left. The drunk guy who had almost assaulted me was now furious, and it took all 4 of his friends to restrain him.
You're a fucking bitch, you fucking slut. I knew I should have raped you.
He screamed at me. Ned told his buddy that they all had to leave now, and that he now understood why they were kicked out of the bar. They weren't allowed to return. He made it clear that if they ever tried to, the police would be called. After that, they left in yet another clamorous episode. I watched them exit the parking lot, and before Dan could apologize for not being there for me when I needed him, I left. That was the last time I ever really hung out at Ned's apartment. I was almost assaulted by a complete stranger who was probably too drunk to remember half of what he did that night. I guess it goes to show you then you can just never be too careful of strangers.